Good afternoon, all. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining us for this show and tell, where we will be covering the work we've been doing on a service manual discovery, focusing on the sort of user research portion of this work. As an agenda for today, we're going to start with a overview of the service at a higher level, just so we can sort of get a context of why, what sort of area of work we're doing this discovery phase in. So Phil will be taking that. I'll take over and give just a brief background on why we're doing this discovery phase, what our goals are. I'm going to pass over to Promise, who's going to give an in-depth presentation on the user research that Promise has been leading on, some really good insights from that piece of work. And then we'll finish off by covering sort of the next steps, what we're working on based on this user research, what we're hoping to move on to in the next couple of weeks. We will then take any questions you have. So yeah, we'll wait till the end for questions. Promise has got quite a lot to cover. So if you could hold those, and we'll pick them up at the end. Just to start with, just to introduce the team. We're not all on the call today. Promise, as I said, has been leading user research. Adrian and Liam will be helping us ideate some ideas, come up with some really good ideas on how we could potentially solve the problems that we've looked into in this discovery phase. And then at the bottom here, we've got myself, Phil, product managers in this area, and Jack, who is leading us from a SLT SRO level. So I'm going to pass over to Phil to give a overview of the Meet Digital Standards service. Over to you, Phil.
Amazing. Cheers, Alan. So I'm sure most folks will be familiar with this. We've got the 6 strategic priorities for CDPS, and Meet Digital Standards is covered by strategic priority number 4, which is all about embedded standards and guidance so that there is consistency in design and delivery. So this is why we're here. It's one of the many reasons why what we're doing is really important, but this underpins everything that we do. So the thing that I just wanted to touch on in terms of the wider Meet Digital Standards stuff, if you can jump on to the next one for us, please, Alan, was to just round out the work about the vision. So we talked about this in July. We'd done the first phase of this. So we went through the users of standards and their needs. We went through what is it we wanted standards, where do we see standards by 2026 and beyond, so to align with that operational and business plan, and then also what were the outcomes we hope standards achieve. So I had colleague support us with that, and we got some really good high-level themes on what we felt the vision should be based on. The second workshop, which we ran in the middle of August, was to take the next step of that, which was to use those themes to write vision statements. So we did this individually, and then we sort of pulled them apart and chatted about them. Then we voted for our favourite, which was this one, about the standards are being used to design better public services and make the jobs of those designing them easier. Spent a little bit of time chatting about how we felt we could make that better, and then Ed and Ocean very kindly iterated for us, turned the language into better words, made sure we could translate it into Welsh, and also made sure it aligned with the tone of voice that we're trying to set for CDPS. So, big thanks to everyone that was involved. We've got the vision board on the link in the slides. It's open. If you want to take a look, go for it. If you want to run a similar session around vision setting, all the info's there, or let me know. So we'll go to the semi-big reveal, which is the vision. Big thanks to Jem and the comms team, because they shared this around last week. So what we've gone with is Wales, where standards make it easier to design better digital public services. And we really like this because good service standards will over time make it easier for teams and organisations to design and build things. And I guess we see standards as being like the central bit of a toolkit of what good looks like. So having this really aspirational North Star to aim for helps inform the rest of the work that we're going to do. So I'm really pleased with that vision. And like I say, big thanks to everyone that was involved in shaping that because it was a team effort. The last thing I wanted to touch on in terms of the wider stuff around Meet Digital Standards was just go into a little bit of what's next, what's coming up. The focus today is rightly service manual, but we've got some bubbling away on the service as a whole. So the first session of the standards working groups happening next Friday. This is a relaunch of the standards board. So you'll hear more about this as it evolves. We're going to start doing service standard review. So I had a really good session with the DMs yesterday, and a big thanks to everyone that came along and was like really open and really got involved. We're hoping to send out a blog post in the next couple of weeks that will hopefully generate interest in people wanting to come forward and like have us work with them to go through their products and services against the standards. A couple of product bits. We want to review our roadmap and just see where we are, and make sure that things are happening, make sure we've got everything captured. I know there's been a couple of other conversations that Jack and I want to bring to it. And then something that's more a thing that I'm worrying about is like just governance within the service and how we're tracking whether Meet Digital Standards is on track or not. So that's just something that would be good to nail down. And then finally, if anyone was at the Tech Net Zero team show and tell a few weeks back, you'll heard James and Stefan talk through their proposals, and one of them was around sustainability as a service standard. So doing some work with both of them to understand what that looks like and how we can support on that. So that's kind of a whistle stop of some of the stuff that's happening wider with Meet Digital Standards, and I'll give please put any questions in the chat, and I'll hand back to Alan and promise who are going to talk about the really interesting stuff today.
Thank you, Phil. I need to check if I'm on mute. Am I on mute?
No.
Perfect. I can't see you. Perfect. Thanks, Phil. So I'm just going to give sort of some context setting of this specific piece of work. Hopefully, Phil has given you that sort of overall view of what the service is about. So we've got a set of standards which set out, what designing good digital public services mean. But I think we'd all agree that they've not really gained traction within the sector. They're not really being used as much as we hope they were being used. So, we've had some feedback that supports this sort of view. The roadshows were held sort of December, January this year and last year. We had some feedback that sort of people need more information on how to actually apply standards in practice. We did some analysis of usage of the standards as they stand on the website, and just we can see that they're not really getting used to any great extent. So the goal of this sort of discovery phase was to see how we could help users in applying these standards. We want them to be used, and we want to support our sort of users in applying the standards. So discovery phase was kicked off with the goal of understanding this sort of problem area, what users need from us that would, to allow them to apply the standards, and we need to understand then what constraints we're operating under in sort of any product we build or service we offer. So with all this information, we'd be able to form some initial ideas on how we could solve the problems, help the users, and then propose, some solutions, prototypes, things like that, that we could test in the next sort of stage of the process, which would of course be an alpha stage. So to do this, we broke down into the work into three work streams, the largest being understanding user needs. Obviously, this is massively important to any work that we do, and promise will be taking us through this work stream in the next slide. Work stream 2 and 3, smaller pieces of work, but still important. Learning from others. I'm sure we're all aware that an idea of a service manual that supports service standards isn't new. GDS, of course, being sort of a really good example of a service manual that solves the same sort of problem. So we've done some work looking at other service manuals, and we'll roll this into any sort of ideas that we come up with. We want to take the best bits of work that's already been done. There's no point in reinventing the wheel, but also it's a jumping off place to improve. And then understanding constraints. We need to understand where we can put this service manual, what limitations the technology presents. So workstream 1 Promise is going to be taking us through this, so I'm going to hand over to Promise to take you through the work that we've done in this area. Over to you, Promise. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. So I'll just give you a cue whenever I need you to help me with the slides. Okay, so I will take everyone through the problem statement, the research objectives, the methodology, the user groups we spoke to, and the key insights from user research. Please, Ellen, next slide. Sorry. Next slide again. Oh no. Yes, this is good. Okay. To come up with a very concrete problem statement, I, Ellen, and Phil, we had this research planning workshop to create alignment. During this workshop, we tried to answer questions like what the problem is, who is affected by the problem, where does the problem occur, why is the problem even important, who are our users, what assumptions do we have, and what do we already know? So after answering all these questions, we're able to come up with the research objectives and the questions as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So from the roadshow that we had back in January, as Ellen mentioned, it was established that the service teams who are building public services do not have a place where they can get specific information or guidance or resources on how to apply and meet each service standard. So they had to guess what it means to meet each service standard or find guidance elsewhere, which may result in services not meeting the standards and not even being improved for the end user. Next slide, please. Next again. Thank you. And so we arrived at 4 research objectives. The first was to understand people's perceptions, their behaviors, and the awareness of the digital service standard for Wales and where they even currently source guidance or information. The second was to understand people's motivation for using a service standard and how it applies to their day-to-day role. And the third was to just find opportunities to improve their current experience of using our service standards. And the fourth was to evaluate the biggest problems we have surrounding the current service standard guidance that we have. Next slide, please. Awesome. So we used 3 research methods so that the limitation of one research method are just mitigated by data from another source. This approach is called triangulation. So first of all, we started by reviewing past user research. We tried to answer questions like what has been done before, how reliable is it, any gaps, what is the most common pain point, how satisfied or dissatisfied our users are. And from there, we moved to user behavior analytics, which helped us just understand actual user behavior with the product. And it also helped us identify opportunities to improve the product design and the development of this product. And another where it helped us was just to identify and predict trends. So to start with, we decided to just come up with the analytics metrics we wanted to track. The metrics were the visits, the time on page, the unique visitors, the pages visited, and even the traffic source. So analytics data could not actually inform us of analytics data could only tell us or show us what the users did, but it couldn't tell us why they actually did what they did. So it left us with this long list of unanswered questions about user motivations. And that was where qualitative research came in to answer those questions. And by analyzing the quantitative user analytics we had and pairing it with the qualitative the qualitative data that we got from user research, we're just able to identify the areas for improvement, which brings me to the last data collection method that we used, which is the user interviews. So we conducted one-on-one one-on-one remote interviews with 9 participants on Microsoft Teams. And participants were just asked to tell us about their roles and their knowledge about service standards. And then more in-depth questions were asked about about service standards and its guidance. And then we showed them the service standard web pages, and we asked them to share their thoughts. Next slide, please. Okay, so recruiting public sector research participants was a very difficult one, I must say. At first, research participants were recruited from our research panel, and we had to use the snowballing method, which means we got referrals from our research participants to other people that might be interested in the session. So that's how we got participants for this research. And yeah, and we had sessions with 9 participants, as I mentioned. We aimed to talk to expected and potential users of the service standard guidance, and we also aimed to talk to new and experienced people that design services. So people in technical, user-centered design, product and delivery, organization management, people that do digital, but they don't know they do digital. Next slide, please. Okay, so now the user research insight. Next slide. Another one. Thank you. Okay, so previous research actually indicated that standards at the time were not being recognized or met, and that people were in need of flexible standards, and people were also they were also in need of being shown what good looks like in form of case studies, self-evaluation tools, DSS champions, and relevant and relatable examples. Next slide, please. Okay, so barriers to so the previous insights from the past user research also identified 5 barriers to the uptake of service standards. And the first was really around the culture of the department with no desire to share. And that was around the business needs being first. And the third was around the fear of having the fear of change. And the fourth was having no balance between what the service needs and the user's needs are. And the fifth one was around organizations not investing in UCD. And this particular point also linked back to organizations also not having the resources to invest in UCD. So, and the fourth insight there also was that was around how CDPS can just improve the uptake of service standards. First was just to convince senior leaderships and approach the team and just keep middle management entirely. And another finding there was around CDPS organizing workshops to just show them what good looks like. Next slide, please. Okay, so we had to explore getting more insight, as I mentioned initially, by using an explanatory sequential design. So that meant us doing user analytics first before trying to find out why with qualitative research. And but before I share the insights from the user behavioral analytics, I'd just like to point out some caveats. The insights that we gathered from the user analytics was from the old website, which uses Google Analytics, because the new website is in beta with no much activity. And we felt, or our assumption was, that we would get a skewed research result because CDPS members were predominantly using the new website and were always coming in to test the website, and we had so many things going on there. So we didn't want to use the new website for this. And so Google Analytics couldn't inform us of some of the data, for instance, the heat mapping and events. So we couldn't really track what users clicked into. Next slide, please. So the insights from the user behavior analytics that we got, the first one was that the standards page ranked 3rd in direct landing. So this could indicate that it is the destination for a substantial portion of website visitors. Next slide. Okay, and 1/3 of the traffic to the standards page landed directly on this landed directly on the standards page. So 1/3 of the traffic to the website, to the standards actually landed directly, which probably indicates its relevance. I would be using probably a lot because, as I mentioned earlier on, it did leave us with a list of unanswered questions. So we did not know why something was happening when it did. And next slide. Thank you. The standards page had the 2nd highest percentage of exits. So most people either left a website through the home page or the standards page. Next slide. The service standard page was actually the 4th most visited page, and time on page was actually higher than any other page. And another insight there was that the bounce rate and the drop-off percentage was higher than other pages, but that could mean a lot of things. And the last point there was that people were not revisiting the web page after visiting once, so we did not have lots of unique visitors. Okay, and the standards page actually ranked, oh my God, sorry, okay. So the standards page ranked 3rd for the starting points for each user session. So the starting points for each user session means that this is where this is the 3rd place that the users of our website actually started from in order to be able to explore our website further. Next slide, please. And not many people visited the standards page from the home page, which was really surprising. So a lot of people just visited it directly, as I mentioned, and if they actually visited the homepage, they navigated to the standards and then to the About Us page. So we actually discovered this when we tried to check the user journey and found that not many people just go visit the standards page from the homepage. Next slide, please. And the next. Okay, so this is what our observation board looks like. This is the insights from the user interviews that we had. This is what the observation board looks like, and we asked participants questions about their perception of service standards, their awareness of the digital service standards for Wales, their experiences using the digital service standards for Wales and any other service standards. That we also try to find out the types of services that they build on the service standards that we have, and their understanding of the obligation to meet the digital service standards. We also try to find out their expectations of service standard guidance and we ask them to go through the current service standards guidance while they share their thoughts, and we also try to ask probing questions if something needed to be dug further or we needed to understand the reason behind a particular statement. Next slide, please. So, to the first point here, the first insight here indicated that participants appreciated that the service standard is specific to Wales. Participants also indicated a need for an overview of the service standards. So participants, at the moment, participants have to go through each service standards before having to reach the one that they're actually interested in. There's no overview, there's no list of service standards that they can easily click into and just go to the ones that they're interested in. So they're actually forced to go through everything and then just go through and then just click on the one that they're really interested in. And the third one was really around participants not noticing that the standards are themed. And when we asked the reason behind this, they did mention that there isn't enough differentiation between the theme heading and the standard heading. And the standards heading. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a quote to back the insights that I just mentioned. So someone mentioned that it is good that it contextualizes it as well specific, and someone also mentioned something around if digital service standards are in Welsh, then it makes you think this is a thing. And that person also mentioned something around not being able to jump in between the standards, not being able to click or go straight to the ones that they're interested in. Next slide, please. Okay, so the statement here at the top in the green color gave a good overview of what and why, as well as the relevance of the service standard to their work. And participants conveyed that the current service standard guidance is too general. So they mentioned that they would like to have like something like a pyramid structure so that the high level aspect at the top is at the top, and then the detail is underneath. So they mentioned that it's actually okay to have something more general, but then yeah, that it would be useful if they just want to show that to their boss or just to a colleague, but if for that it wouldn't really help them actually meet the service standards itself, and wouldn't really tell them what to do to meet the service standards. And the third point here was that the service standard guidance wasn't really engaging and too text based. Next slide, please. So here's another quote to support the insight I just mentioned. So mentioned that the content was really text heavy. They don't have time, and they also mentioned something around being visual and just liking to see the whole thing being mapped out. And another participant did mention something around mentioned something around the fact that how to do it bit was missing. So we're not actually showing them how to do it or indicating it there or making it clear. Next slide, please. Okay, and so why this is important helped participants to feel a sense of ownership. And this is something they found really useful. So they actually also indicated that why this is important, that it is good that it is just really short, brief, and straight to the point. And participants also highlighted a disparity between the standards with in-text links and the ones without. So if you, aside having the screenshot that I have here on the slide, if you go through the service standards that we have at the moment, you'd see that there are no links, for instance, for the standards 3, understand users and their needs, and there are some, so it's just really there's a huge disparity. So some standards have in-text links and others don't have in-text links. Some standards also have explanations or well-written explanations, others don't. So they actually highlighted a disparity here. And they also mentioned that they want to know how they can actually meet the digital service standards. They want to have enough context about how it's being used and who is using it and how. And they also mentioned that they gave the reason for this as it being easier to see and envisage impacts that standards have if they can see how others have actually implemented it. And participants also expressed confusion about whether there are 3 or 12 service standards, which fit into the previous insights about participants not realizing that the service standards are themed. Next slide. So a participant mentioned that it's always good to see who else has used it and the benefits they have. And next slide, please. Okay, and so participants also mentioned that that we're not actually that at the moment we're not actually looking at the inclusion bit, the service standard inclusion bit of that we're not looking at the Welsh context, that our current in-text links takes users out of our service standard guidance to other service manual that doesn't have anything to do with the Welsh context. So they mentioned that there are already existing infrastructures in Wales, which we could help highlight, and that could actually help signpost, and we could also signpost participants to that. And participants also indicated that the current guidance cannot drive the adoption of the service standard guidance. So they mentioned that some of the standards are tailored to established teams, while some organizations don't have the resources to have, for instance, a user researcher or a service owner. So it doesn't really tell them how they can actually conduct user research without a user researcher. And they also found that having everything in one page was overwhelming, and a participant actually clicked into this link that I've just highlighted here in red. And when a participant actually clicked into this link, it did not actually meet the expectations because this link actually took them to a very different page entirely and did not have anything to do with and did not have anything to do with what they were hoping to find. So next page, please. Thank you. And so there are a couple of quotes here also to just support the insight that I just mentioned. So someone mentioned that it's very thin in terms of the reason to come back to it. And that person did mention that reading it on phone would take forever. So this was in regard to the fact that everything on one page was just overwhelming for them. Next slide, please. So, and participants also mentioned that having many in-text links were distracting for them, and that the web page also displayed inconsistent fonts, which created a visually disjointed experience for them. And participants also mentioned that they needed directive on responsibility and ownership. And next slide, please. So when a participant was just going through a web page and clicked into a particular link, they did not actually realize that they were leaving a website. So that was, so when I did prompt that, they actually mentioned that they did not realize that they moved to another website entirely, and they were not in our website. So this was something that was really insightful, that some participants didn't just notice. And yeah, next slide, please. And participants also indicated that let's stay in touch button was irrelevant to them. So when we asked why, they did mention that they've gone through our page and haven't seen a help button, or how can we support you button, or we're here if you need any help or something. So they said that they would prefer to see a help or a support button instead, a link to related resources or guidance on how to meet these digital service standards, instead of a let's stay in touch button, which is really insightful. And they also mentioned that they would like to have a button to sign up to when the web page has been updated, so that them too, though, will be updated and they'll be carried along. So next slide, please. Thank you. And so someone mentioned something around not knowing how CDPS can help their standards, help them with their standards. And another person mentioned something around us not referring to the strategy for digital inclusion. That this particular quote is linked to the fact that we have not actually linked related guidance to this that could actually give them the Welsh context. Okay, and we did have two Welsh speakers share their thought on the Welsh version of the service standards. So a participant actually did something interesting, was going through the Welsh version of the service standards and had to go back into the English version because they did not really understand the particular phrase on the Welsh version. So they had to go into the English version and then go back into the Welsh version. So when they went into the English version, they just had that aha moment. Okay, this is what we're trying to say. And then they went back into the Welsh version. And to them, they found that doing this back and forth didn't really help their experience. And obviously, we wouldn't want to give them such experience as well. And when we asked them their thought around this, they did mention that the Welsh version was really wordy and that it sounded really formal and not like the regular Welsh that they speak. Next slide, please. So the quote to support this insight was that I speak Welsh every day and wouldn't like this. Not Welsh like we speak, it's very formal. Some of it in Welsh is a bit like reading a novel. So this is how this participant felt when they were going through the Welsh version of the service standards. And next slide, please. Okay, so we have a couple more key insights that we got from this round of user research. And some of these insights actually revalidated the findings that we had from the past user research. Although they are currently not in scope, but this would be used to inform the next work stream or the next piece of work that we have to do for the service standards itself. So one of those insights, or the first one here, is that participants didn't understand the benefits of standards and why they actually matter. And second here was that participants are keen for people to talk to them about the digital service standards, which also fits back to the past user research about them having someone come talk to them, someone organizing a workshop. And another point here was that participants need to be able to assess the quality of service that they are providing and how it measures against the standards. And the last one here was really around the expectation for senior managers to drive the standards in an organization from top to bottom and not from bottom to up to the top. So, and this is also something that we found in the past user research, and would be interesting to look into this in the next piece of work that we'll do for the service standards. So, yeah, that is me, and I hope you found the user research insights as interesting as we actually found it. And I will pass this over to Phil.
Amazing, thanks, Promise. I found it really useful hearing that again, and I remember being in that session with a Welsh user and watching them go back and forth, and that blew my mind. So I'm just gonna do a bit of a whistle stop of how we've taken all those really interesting insights and what we've learned through talking to our users and turning those into ideas to test and problems and something we can take forward into the next phase, into alpha. So we're not going to spend too much time on this. I'm more than happy to set up a separate session where we talk through the process of how we did it and how we went from research and broke those down and themed them and created the how might we's and the ideas, but we just didn't have the time today. So if you want us to do that, just let us know. We're really happy to. So we've been using a technique called how might we. You might know this as how might we problems or how might we questions. It does exactly as the slide says. What it's really useful for is it enables us to generate loads of ideas. We're keeping the problems we're trying to solve in mind and not falling into the trap of solutionizing. So if you jump on to the next one for us, please, Alan. Amazing. So then the thing on the right, the left is really small. I'll read through a couple of those, but so these are the 9 how might we statements we're going to take forward into the idea generation stage. We had more than that, and 9's still quite a lot. But as we went through the activity of iterating the how might we's that we'd written, and it was a really good team effort between the 3 of us on the call today, but also with Jack and Adrian and Liam, we started to understand and identify that if we solved some of the bigger problems, the bigger how might we's, we'd probably solve a lot of the other ones. So, for example, the top 3, which I'll just read through, are how might we make sure that users have the information to apply the standards in practice, which links back to something that Promise has just talked about. How might we provide relevant and flexible guidance for users and is adaptable to a user's context? And also, how might we communicate how standards should be used? Well, if we can solve those problems through generating ideas and testing different ways of doing it, we're probably going to solve some of those other ones down the bottom around, sharing others' successes and experiences. Again, something we heard a lot through research was how do we do this? How do we meet these standards? We're probably going to make it useful for users to keep coming back. So now we've got those problems and we've got the how might we statements. The next part of this is to generate ideas and come up with the hypothesis to test, which is what we want to take forward into alpha about how we can actually make the service manual really useful to folks. So we started that process yesterday with a idea workshop where we focused on the first 3. We've got another one coming up soon, which I think is going to be in person in Cardiff. So if anyone is around Cardiff, I think Anne's going to cover off the date on that day. If you want to pop your head in, come along and see how we're getting on and get involved. And yeah, like I say, more than happy to go through how we got from the insights to the how might we's, but it's probably a different session than that. But I'm going to hand over to Alan now, who's just going to wrap up, and then we should have some time for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Thanks, Promise. Loads of work from led by Promise over the last couple of weeks, and yeah, we've made massive gains. Moved forward a lot within this project. So as Phil mentioned, a couple of dates coming up. One is now in the past, so we had a really good session yesterday, generated loads of ideas, loads of good ideas coming from the team. We're going to sort of get more detailed on these ideas in an in-person session, and then we're going to sort of discuss our findings, our hypotheses with senior leadership teams to get that agreement to move forward to alpha, where we'll be able to build prototypes, test prototypes, and really really make sure that we're solving the right problem. So yeah, just a little diagram there. We've come a long way, but there's still a lot of work to be done. So yeah, so more show and tells to come. Thanks for attending the session, and I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully we'll have some questions from you. Let's see how I can do this. Stop sharing. Lovely, awesome. I haven't seen the chat, so I don't know if there's anything in there, but if anyone does have any questions, please unmute, and we'll be happy to take them. Go on. There you go. Brave. No, we haven't got anything. Oh, go on, please.
I'll start. So really impressive. That's my initial comment. It's just absolutely great to see things happen. I think for me, as I look across CDPS, this is one of the areas that it's great to see pace, because we've got some services that are older and more mature and more established, like our learning and work around delivering courses. So it's really great to see you kind of motoring forward. Can you give me, it's inevitable, I have to ask this question. I'm sorry, you could almost anticipate that I will. Can you give me a bit more detail on how you envisage the next steps? I know you don't want to solutionize, Phil. I know you're going to say that. But will you reassure me a little bit more about what your kind of gut feeling is around what's coming next, and where you're likely to be going? And I'm sorry to push you on that, because I know you explicitly said you don't want to solutionize, but I wouldn't be doing my job unless I asked you that.
Well, I think we're definitely at the stage where we need to start solutionizing. It has to happen at some point, unfortunately, and we are there. And I'd say the likely place where we're going, and Phil, jump in when you have something, is the GDS manual is a gold standard. It's been replicated by other organizations across the world, and as a concept, I think that's where we're going. But I think we do have some specific ideas that will hopefully improve on that and make it more applicable to the Welsh context. So we're really excited on some of the ideas we've sort of come up with. I think some big ones, case studies, I think was massive promise within the user research. People wanted to see specific sort of case studies on how people applied these standards, not just some guidance. No, can I see how it's been applied in practice? So I think that will allow us to be improving on GDS's offering. Phil, do you have anything on that?
Just to add, I think, just to take that point a bit further, I think that's the opportunity. Is like, I think we know what's out there, and it's funny, we were having a conversation yesterday at our first ideation workshop of like, the drawback of all these other service manuals and these other places you see it is it's as promises described, it's text, it's flat, it's if you know what you're looking for, it's fine, but if you're not sure, there's quite a lot of stuff to wade through. So like, the opportunity we have, and it might not be the thing we launch when we first launch something as an MVP, but like, is to make it adaptable to people's context. There's those how might we statements. How do you make it flexible? How do you make it adaptable to someone's context? So that if that user group that Promise described of the people who are doing digital but don't realise they're doing digital, how do we make it relevant for them? So I think there's loads of opportunity within that. So yeah, I suspect when we come back and speaking with SLT and yourself and Harriet Meyer in a month's time, like some of those hypotheses of what we want to test will be drawn out as well.
Yeah, but the content message Promise, that was really, really strong, and it was lovely to see that, because you have those things highlighted and based on your research, and you think, oh yeah, of course, that's just it's that wonderful thing about people using your content, and you're going, God, yeah, that's so obvious. I just want to ask, I've just got another question, a follow-up question as well. So obviously, you're sitting in the standards and guidance service, as kind of using headlines, I would call it. Where are you going to need to draw on support from the other services, and how aligned and how supported do you feel? And where, where else can we help you, across CDPS?
Well, that's a good question. So I've probably got a couple of thoughts on this. So there's the obvious question around like resource support in terms of like how we have design folks, like people who are good at creating content. So we've got Liam and Adrian, and I know Jack's picking this up with Joe when he's back from Liam about how we support that bit so that we can actually design prototypes and tests. There's probably something around when we get to like having a better idea of how long alpha is going to be, when we're going to get to beta, and like who built it, like so the tech people's come in and build it, developers. Then there's probably the conversations we have there. I think wider than that, and this is where I fall into solutionizing and kind of look at the bit that's a bit further away on the roadmap, but there's definitely a lot of opportunity, and Pete and Rob and I were chatting about this ironically this morning, but of like how do we stitch this together with other parts of what CDPS does, like training, and like, I think Pete started to line me up for a load of lunch and learns on service standards, but it's things like that. Like there's a lot of crossover, and part of the reason of doing the session yesterday with the delivery managers on the standards review, service standards review, is to start to take that into teams as well that we partner with. So it's, whilst the product we're talking about right now is the service manual, there's a lot of stuff around the edges that we can also be doing to help embed a lot of this.
Yeah, and for me, because I have to look across with Harriet and SLT, but primarily myself and Harriet have to look across the whole of CDPS and shape appropriately our resources. And you'll know from being in the public sector, October, November, we're going to start looking at the shape of next year's budget and how we allocate it, and the work that we take on. So whilst not solutionizing, getting a sense of your envelope and your skill sets to enable this to flourish is if you can feed that up through Jack and others, that's incredibly helpful for me as well, so that we don't get to kind of June of next year and we're all tearing our hair out because we're all meant to be in different places, or we actually haven't got the right people, or those kind of, I know that's difficult, but it's very, very helpful for me going forward as well. And I'll stop talking, but thank you. It's really good.
Thank you. If we don't have any other questions, I can't see any hands. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds while I drag this sentence out. But no, okay. Thanks to Promise and Phil, and thanks for all of your time. We'll wrap it up there. And yeah, so any questions going forward, please drop us a line. Phil, Promise, myself, anyone, get in touch. And yeah, thanks again, and have a good afternoon. Cheers all.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.